Yeah, so hello, I'm Dawn Orsak. Thank you, Leanna and Linda, for the help and for inviting me to talk. I'm going to talk to you today about my Morkovsky family, which is my maternal grandmother's family. And I know everyone on Zoom would even rather see the slides than my face, so we're going to start with that. Okay. Yes, so I'm going to tell you about the family, and I'm going to tell you about many of the preservation efforts that came out of my fascination with the materials. So I'm not an archivist, I'm not a librarian. I use lots of books and websites for inspiration along the way, intuition, but I am very passionate about being family historian, which may be the one thing you get out of today's talk. And hopefully inspire you with your own collection. So in April of this year, I donated 19 banker's boxes of materials about the family to the Dolph Briscoe Center for American History at UT Austin.
I'm just going to drag this out of your way.
Okay. Okay,
Sorry.
Thank you. No, you're fine. So it's a total of 21 linear feet, which the Briscoe tells me is a large collection. It's not their largest. Their largest family collection is like 53 linear feet, so more than double what we've donated. But it spans from 1815 to the 1990s. I don't know if collecting things is in our family blood or we just have an aversion to throwing things away. It's not really hoarding, but you know, for generations and generations, starting with my great-grandfather, it feels like the family saved every piece of paper that ever came through their hands. The best way to describe the collection is that it's an interconnected web of thousands of pieces of paper and objects and films that tell the story of one multi-generational Texas-Czech Catholic family over a century or a little more. And the family's story is told with photos, report cards, receipts, drafts of speeches, student records, films, passports, certificates of baptism, marriage, prayer cards, business contracts, letters, hand-drawn land surveys, clothing, personal notes, and so many one-off things I couldn't make a list. And the themes, which are really why the collection has some importance, are Catholicism, education, family, and Texas-Czech culture. So the collection is really made up mostly of the papers of three men. The man in the middle is my great-grandfather, Alois Morkovsky, and his two sons, Bishop John Morkovsky and his son, Monsignor Alois Morkovsky. Although the collection does include materials from many other family members, that their papers are really the bulk. And for reference, I knew Bishop John and Monsignor. They both died the same year. They died when I was 23. But Alois Morkovsky Sr. died 6 years before I was born. So I didn't know him. He died in '61. And for reference in the talk, because there are two Aloises, I'm going to call the senior Alois Morkovsky, and then I'm going to refer to Bishop John or Monsignor. And that's actually how our family, I don't know for how long, but for how our family refers to them, not Uncle Alois or Uncle John. It was Monsignor and Bishop John. During Monsignor's eulogy, which is one of the papers at the Briscoe, at Sacred Heart Catholic Church in Hallettsville, the celebrant said, "We have traced for our own edification a brief story of Monsignor Alois Morkovsky's life, but we must pay tribute to the entire Morkovsky family. That family has earned its deserved place in the Catholic history of the state of Texas. That family must stand out today as a model of Catholic family life and must go down in history as one of the greatest of Texas Catholic families." Well, that's a pretty dramatic statement, but it does speak to why the Morkovsky papers are unique and why they're important. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about each of those three men that I showed you the photos of, and tell a little bit about their story through images of things that are part of the collection. This is the house that my great-grandfather Alois left in 1883 at the age of 12 with an aunt and uncle. His story is, similar to so many Texas-Czech family stories. The house was located outside of Frenstadt pod Radhoštěm, which is in Moravia, now part of the Czech Republic. This photo was actually taken in 1933 by Monsignor and Bishop John, who took a trip there together to Czechoslovakia. But the house probably looks exactly the same as it did 50 years earlier when Alois left. And I begin with this image because, to me, it reminds me of the arc of the story of the collection, which started by removing, there's a Bible in the collection that from 1815 in Czech. I presume grandfather Alois or one of his two brothers took it from this house, and then all the way to the Briscoe Center 140 years later. And that's a photo of Bishop John sitting on the porch of a house on the same trip. So after arriving in Texas, my great-grandfather worked his way from farmhand to teacher, school teacher. He taught himself English, studied alone for his first teacher's certificate, which was from Lavaca County. He received in 1891. And this is actually a contract from the Ammansfield Common School. I don't have one from Lavaca County, the first one, but it gives you an idea of some of the teaching materials that are part of the collection because he saved all of his contracts and correspondence with school district people. And he actually also wrote an autobiography in 1955, and I'm going to read you a little from that about the teaching profession. He said, "Attaining the teaching profession made me so happy that I thanked God fervently for such a favor. I always had a high regard for teachers, but I had never hoped to rise to such a status. In Europe, I would have never made it. In gratitude, I resolved to pay the way to Texas for my brother Joseph, who was 23 and I was 21. I went to Praha to Mr. Anton Nasursta, who was a steamship agent, and immediately paid the fare for my brother." And so here's a photograph of Alois with his brother, and the documentation of the steamship purchase of his ticket, which is also part of the collection. And what there isn't time for in this talk is just the million of family stories that are part of it. The brother Joseph, who grandfather, if you read some of his letters, Sandra, he just loved this brother, died like a couple of weeks before Alois Morkovsky graduated from Sam Houston State University. And he actually missed the funeral because he was so grief-stricken. He had to make his way from Huntsville to LaGrange, and just a tragic story. He died in 1896. But eventually, Alois did go to Sam Houston Normal. It was Sam Houston Normal Institute at the time, and he was there from 1893 to 1896, and he graduated with a teaching degree. And there are many things related to his time at Sam Houston Normal Institute that are part of the collection. There are 120 pieces of his work, so lessons he wrote out for students, his own assignments and drawings. There are photographs of his teachers and other students. You can see on the bottom of this photograph, he wrote all the names of the students, which will be gold for somebody, I'm sure. One of the gems is a really large hand-bound book that he made of collected plant samples from in and around Huntsville with all the scientific information handwritten out. Also part of the collection, he won the Peabody Medal, which was named after George Peabody, whose philanthropic efforts really established Sam Houston State University. And grandfather won the medal that year, and in his, it's got his name engraved, if you can see up there. This is now lives at the Briscoe, and grandfather wrote about this moment. At the formal closing of term in June, a Medal of Merit was given to the best student in each of the 13 classes. The honored guest giving out the medals had trouble reading the name on the first one until he finally announced Morkovsky. This surprise surely shook me. I had not expected anything, and here a medal. Trembling, I was barely able to go up to receive it. So now he's a teacher back in Lavaca County, and he married my great-grandmother, Marie Roshka, in 1898. She was actually born in Texas in 1876 near Frelsburg in Austin County, but her family was from Koprivnica, which is in the same area in Moravia as Alois. Her wedding dress, is the one thing the Briscoe would not take because it was in such bad condition. So there's a lesson for you about preservation and why it's important, because the dress is complete, but it was just in such bad condition they couldn't have somebody repair it. So now our family is going to do some kind of personal craft projects with the wedding dress. So I'm going to read you a little something about my great-grandmother's character, and it's from a letter that's in the Briscoe collection that Bishop John received. So her son received a condolence letter from one of his previous teachers. Marie died in 1937, so this is a letter from right after, in November 1937. Bishop John's teacher wrote, "I remember you when we were all together so long ago, and your saintly mother caring for her little ones so sweetly and patiently. She has always seemed a model of Catholic motherhood to me, and when I recall her with her babies around the Christmas crib with the grace of God, I think hers was the most beautiful face I've ever seen." So more drama, but really just lovely, and you get a sense of her from these papers that are there. There are actually over 150 postcards of Marie Morkovsky's that she either wrote to her children and they saved, or letters that she received from her sister Clara Sikora, who had moved to Oklahoma. So together, Alois and Marie had 10 children over 16 years, all of whom, besides Monsignor and Bishop John, obviously had children, either 1 to 9 children. This photograph was taken in 1929, and I just labeled their actual children. But you can see 4 grandchildren there, Alois and Marie in the middle. The little boy in the lap of Marie is Bob Morkovsky, who's 95, and he's still going strong. So over his 60-year teaching career, Alois taught in rural schools in Fayette and Lavaca counties, many with Czech names: Radhošť, Hostín, Vyšehrad, Praha, Kaminsky, and other communities in those counties. And he served on the Lavaca County School Board for almost 20 years. And throughout his life, like Monsignor and Bishop John, he promoted the teaching of Czech. This is from a speech, a handwritten speech in 1911, which is also part of the Briscoe collection, called "Foreign Language in Schools, Value, Purpose, and Place." Alois wrote that we should teach foreign language in schools when so requested by patrons. I wish to emphasize, for language is a divine gift, and when the foreign language in question is the native tongue heard from dear mother's lips of that child, it would be a sin not to grant the request. So he felt really strongly about teaching foreign language in schools. That is actually a photograph, I think, of the Hostín, one of his Hostín classes. And this is a souvenir that he had printed for his students. You can see all the students' names there. So I love the idea of somebody going and finding this and seeing their great-grandparents' name on it, because Alois had included that. From 1929 to 1940, he was the editor of the Czech newspaper, the Nový Domov, which was in Hallettsville. And for 3 years during World War II, he worked for the censorship office. And Czech was obviously his foreign language specialty, although he spoke German too. And this is a certificate of merit that he received for working for the censorship office. In 1952, he was awarded a papal medal called the Pro Ecclesia et Pontifex Medal. And in the Briscoes collection is the actual medal, newspaper articles that he saved, correspondence about the logistics of the lunch. He saved all the pieces of paper that he got about where he was supposed to be at what time and who else was going to be there. He handwrote a speech, so his speech and everything he said about accepting it is in the collection, and a certificate signed by Pope Pius XII. He also saved the program from the luncheon, which was at the Gunther Hotel. So we know he ate half a broiled grapefruit, roast turkey, and pumpkin chiffon pie at the lunch, which I love finding those little things. And that, of course, Bishop John was the Toastmaster at the event. There's so much crossover with those kinds of things. All the documents I just showed you are some of the thousands of pieces of paper at the Briscoe. And some other things that my grandfather's personal materials that are there, lots of things related to his teaching career. There are books, chitankas, which are first readers, books about pedagogy and teaching Czech language to adults. Student records, lots of student records, like this one is from Old Sweet Home, but he saved his booklets from I guess he didn't have to turn them in, 1890s to the 1940s, so somebody can go see not just their great-grandparents' name on the record, but their grades, so it should be interesting. Lots of school-related correspondence, personal essays and speeches. He saved handwritten scripts for 3 Czech plays that were given to by a local dramatic club in the 1920s. Letters both from people, as you might expect, but letters to people, because he would save the drafts that he wrote. And documents related to the Nový Domov, lots of things on the newspaper's letterhead. But also he translated Uncle Tom's Cabin into Czech. And then it ran as a serial in the Nový Domov, and then he saved the manuscript. So there's that. I'm sure Uncle Tom's Cabin had been translated into Czech at some point by somebody, but there are documents related to the censorship office, paychecks or pay stubs that he got paid, and interesting things like that. And then also when he was at Sam Houston Normal Institute, he was asked to draw 28 maps for this textbook called A History of Our Country, which was written, did I say in 1895? It was published in 1895. And the author was Henry S. Steele, who became the 5th president of Sam Houston State University. And in the collection is Aloys's own copy, inscribed to him by Henry S. Steele, some communications with Professor S. Steele, and a couple of drafts of the maps, but not the original maps themselves, which must have gone to the publisher. In his autobiography, grandfather Aloys Morkovsky did say he made $10 for all the maps. Yeah. Aunt Jane, you see yourself. So eventually I want to add to the Briscoes collection interviews with all of the grandchildren, Aloys's grandchildren, because there are 2 in the room today, and there are at least 3 that are in their 90s, many in their 80s, and so I want to go through and interview the grandchildren about him. I had a talk with my Aunt Jane, and she said a little bit about his character, and I'm paraphrasing you. Grandfather was very stubborn. He had to be strong, no foolishness, no reason for that. But at the same time, he had a big heart. He was patient and personally disciplined, loved his family, but was pretty stern. He had to have fortitude to make the decisions he did, and he experienced a lot of trauma in his upbringing and his life in general. But I show you these 2 photos because they're contemporaneous, so you can see, what grandfather looked like to some of the grandchildren when they were young. That's my Aunt Jane right here in the audience and on the screen. Aloys lived with the Collis family, with my Aunt Jane's family and my mother's family, after his wife died in 1937 and for most of his life. And so this is the house he lived behind. And that's my mom standing in the white coat in front. So there are dozens of home movies, also part of the collection. Monsignor started filming in the 1930s. The earliest films are from 1936 through the 70s, I think, and Bishop John recorded also. I'm going to play you just a tiny clip of Alois. I'm sorry, I've been calling him grandfather because I'm always talking to his grandchildren, and that's the easiest way for me to say it, though he was my great-grandfather. So here's a little clip of Alois playing with my mom's family. And I show this because I'm just enchanted with seeing somebody born in 1870, in color, smiling, playing in a front yard. So everybody cross your fingers. There he is. That's my mom on the top there. And Aunt Jane on the bottom in red. And grandfather's pointing hand, trying to direct. And these are my aunts and uncles. And at the end is Alois. There's my grandmother, and there's Alois. So you can see him actually in person. Well, not in person, moving. So the second man whose materials are part of the collection is Monsignor Alois, who was the oldest of Alois Sr.'s children. That's him circled in red between his parents in the photograph. And I'm going to start briefly with one of the most precious family heirlooms that we have is actually the christening gown that Marie made for Monsignor's birth in 1899. We still have it, and it's now been worn by 4 generations of family members. But Marie is actually holding Bishop John. There's no photograph of Monsignor in the gown that I've ever seen, unfortunately, as the first child to wear it. But that's Bishop John, and here on the left is me wearing it, being baptized by Bishop John. And then on the left, on the right, is my son Dougal wearing it. He's in the front row here, on the gown's 100th anniversary. And then the last baby to have worn it is my niece in the center, Emma Giorgio, in 2007. So the dress is not a part of the Briscoe collection yet. I hope it is eventually. Right now it's in a box of materials that's part of the traveling show for the Morkovsky reunion. We take it and to the reunion each year and let people take a look at it. So we don't just save paper, we save fabric too. So back to Monsignor. He started his education at St. John's Seminary in San Antonio in 1915, which is the year it opened. So he was the first class also. And he finished his education at Benedictine College at St. Meinrad's in Indiana. After graduating, he came back to San Antonio and ended up being a professor at St. John's, where he taught for 17 years. He was ordained in 1924, and he did his first solemn mass in Shiner at St. Cyril and Methodius' big, beautiful brick church in Shiner. This is a picture of him around that time and a picture of my grandmother dressed as a flower girl for his first solemn mass. And here's a photo of the crowd inside the church at that moment. It was a big deal in 1924 when a native son from right around there, they may have actually lived in Shiner at the time. They did for a while, which is pretty cool. Monsignor was also, when he was in San Antonio as professor at St. John's, he was also custodian of the old Franciscan mission buildings in San Antonio. And apparently the restoration of San Jose Mission was in full swing at the time. This is an endeavor I want to learn more about because I've only seen it in passing, but I'm really interested in what he had to do with the restoration. He served as pastor of Sacred Heart Church in Hallettsville for 25 years and Holy Rosary Church in Hostine until he retired in 1974. This is a surplice, which is part of his priestly vestments, and it's part of the Briscoe collection now. I don't really know the history of the garment, but if he retired in 74, It's from the 60s or early 70s or so, or maybe earlier. So like his brother and his father, he also promoted his Czech heritage throughout his life. He was the state chaplain of KJZT, which is a Czech fraternal organization, for 15 years. He served as something called the moderator of the National Czech Catholic Sokol. Sokol is, for lack of a better word, it's a gymnastics organization. It's much bigger than that and addresses bigger issues of your personal health and well-being than just gymnastics. But he was the moderator of that in the 1930s, and he was the editor of their paper, national paper called The Falcon. That's him in the picture up in the right, on the right-hand side. And I didn't think the larger photo was that meaningful. It was just part of his collection. I thought it was from an event, but you can actually see my grandmother in there in the second from top row on the left-hand side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people in. So she must have been in for a little while. And that says Vitame Vas. I don't know where this was taken. It wasn't labeled on the back. Lesson to label all your photographs on the back in pencil. But the words on the hall say Vitame Vas, which means we welcome you, I think. Whoops, I'm not forwarding. Linda. I did something wrong. Talk amongst yourselves.
So I think you just needed to click on the slide because it was still on that.
Okay.
So now there we go.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. It takes a village. Okay, Monsignor also wrote this book, Czech and Other Priests in Texas, in 1980. And I used it for a lot of the biographical information about Bishop John and Monsignor. He also, who has played Tarak? Taraki. Nobody? Does anyone know what the Czech card game Tarak? Yes? So Monsignor wrote a very thoughtful and sometimes humorous rules for Tarak, and he called it the Ladies and Gentlemen's Noble Game of Tarak, which I find interesting because the women in my family were not taught to play Tarak, only the men. But I'm going to read you a little bit of his rules because it tells you something about his character. The endless variety yet due orderliness of the game is brain-teasing, wit-sharpening, and spiritually elevating. For relaxation, it is a tonic that relieves the mind of all other cares and concentrates it on the most intriguing preoccupation, so varied, rapid, and transient that it leaves the mind unencumbered and ready to return to the humdrum of life, still elated from the harmless distraction and the exhilarating game of Tarak. It has no end except quitting. Now get out your Tarak deck and study it. Homework first, and then go play, which I think kind of summarizes his attitude about all kinds of things. These are not Monsignor's Tarak cards, but there is a deck of Bishop John's Tarak cards at the Briscoe in a wooden case with his name engraved on them, if anyone knows how he came to own it, but those are part of the collection. Monsignor's personal materials also include books, report cards from all of his classes at St. Meinrad's and St. John's, photos of this trip that I mentioned that he and Monsignor took in 1930, that he and Bishop John took in 1933 to Czechoslovakia. There are pictures of each of them at the top, and they visited even the ancestral homes of their both parents, including Morkov, which is the village that gave birth to the name Morkovsky. There are a box of magic lantern slides that admittedly may have been used by Alois Sr. I can't figure out there's no documentation of exactly who they belong to. They're like a centuries-old PowerPoint presentation. If you know what magic lantern, it's like a projector that has a giant lens on it like that. So there's maybe 60 to 70 slides in the box. The Briscoe would only take one box. I have 21 boxes. So there's over 1,000 slides, magic lantern slides. And they're gorgeous. I don't know if they hand built these boxes, but they've been very protected from light, and so the colors are really vibrant. And then lastly, there are written speeches, there are essays, there are his home movies, there are 50 letters, and lots of materials related to the KJT and the KJZT, the Catholic fraternal organizations that he was really involved with. That's him in the tiny suit in the baby picture. That's him in the dark suit. So the last man I'm going to tell you about is Bishop John Morkovsky. Did anyone here ever have dealings with Bishop John? No, okay. He was the first native-born Catholic bishop of Texas-Czech descent. There had been priests and monsignors, but he was the first bishop in Texas who was a native Texas-Czech, which was a big deal for the Texas-Czech community. He spent 6 years at St. John's Seminary also in San Antonio, and actually he started the year his older brother, Monsignor, started teaching there. So I don't know if one brother taught the other, but he then actually went on to Rome, and he was in Rome for 6 years where he was ordained, got a doctorate of theology. And in the collection in the Briscoe collection is this lovely letter from 1933, just a few days after he was ordained, that he wrote back to his older brother, Monsignor, who had been ordained. And he wrote, "Dear brother, now that the busiest days are over, I can sit down to describe the great events that have happened. I know that you're here in spirit, closer than anyone else from home. Besides being already initiated into the indescribable joys that come with ordination, you also had the advantage of having seen the setting in which it took place. I do not think I shall attempt to describe the great feeling of joy. You have felt it yourself, the feeling of having taken an important and irrevocable step, and yet with no hesitation or desire to look back at what one leaves behind forever." So this also really speaks to me about the collection, that it's part of Texas history, it's part of Catholic history, it's part of Texas-Czech history because of their background, but it's so personal. This is not at the Catholic Archives Diocese in Houston, Galveston. This is a family letter between two brothers who can understand, this momentous occasion that he went through. He came back to Texas from Rome in 1936. He served as the pastor of several churches in Lavaca County and San Antonio. He earned a master's degree in education and then became the superintendent of schools for the Archdiocese of San Antonio, which he did for about 15 years before they moved him to Amarillo to be auxiliary bishop, and that's what this newspaper is about. He was there until 1963, and then they moved him to Houston, Galveston, where he was also auxiliary bishop, and then became the bishop of Houston, Galveston from 1975 to 1984. While he was there, he founded the Texas Catholic Herald, which will celebrate its 60th anniversary next year. This is volume 1, number 1 of the newspaper, which is in the collection. Like his father and his older brother, he promoted his Czech heritage throughout his life. He co-founded the Houston Slavic Festival, which is also celebrating its 60th anniversary this year in September, so you should go. And from 1987 to 1990, he hosted a Catholic radio show just outside of Houston called Nieco pro každého, something from everyone. And in the Briscoe collection are 100 episodes recorded on cassette of that radio show, but every one of his handwritten notes for each of the radio shows also. His personal materials also include hundreds of newspaper clippings, a whole box of his old passports, driver's licenses, his Boys Club of America car, all his IDs, over 600 photographs, a box of objects that include gifts that he was given and holy relics. And apparently he was an honorary Harris County sheriff. There's his badge with his name on it. You know, all the kinds of things that a dignitary, you know, would be receiving. And there's a really cool group of materials. He went to Vatican II Council in 1964 in Rome, and there is his Vatican passport and all the information from the travel agency about how much they paid and his itinerary for the trip. Here are two of my favorite photographs, which are so opposite. One is him with Mother Teresa at the 40th International Eucharistic Congress in Melbourne, Australia in 1973. But then there's also him on the family donkey named Ginny. That's him at the front of the donkey, who apparently lived to be 25 and could open gates and barn doors herself. And she was, and that's my grandmother with the doll at the front. Here's Bishop John with a car that he bought and the bill of sale that says how much he paid and how much he's going to repay monthly. So this shows you too that the collection, you know, it's not just Catholic, it's not just Czech, it's, you know, family, which is one of the reasons too why I looked for somewhere that wasn't just a Catholic archive and not a Texas-Czech organization, which would have been a natural place too. This is how I remember Bishop John in the middle. So here's a little something about his character, and this is from the Slavic Heritage Festival program book. They write about their founders every year. Bishop Morkovsky was a compassionate, caring man with a homespun kind of humor. He enjoyed life and wanted everyone to enjoy it with him. He liked to fish, golf, hunt, garden, and attend any kind of gathering, especially family reunions, singing and playing his harmonica. So all three of these men were, you know, hugely involved in the Czech community, the Catholic community, in education. They all spoke Czech fluently and wrote it fluently. You know, maybe 60 or 70% of the collection is in Czech. But, you know, their documentation of their endeavors is one of the reasons why the Briscoe Center thought that the collection as a whole was worthy of preserving. And Leanna, you're gonna have to give me some timers because I'm just going. So you let me know if I'm getting close.
We're fine right now.
Okay. So about the collection as a whole. So as I prepared this talk, I realized that the first batch of things that I had was actually from 30 years ago. I moved to Austin in 1993, was unemployed, looking for a job, and decided to do some genealogy work at the Catholic Archives. And was chit-chatting with the archivist who said, hey, you know, it's 1993, no computer, anything. Would you like to microfilm all of the articles that we have about Bishop John? So I said, sure, I'll do that. I'm looking for a job. So I sat in the Catholic Archives and microfilmed all of these articles, which they then gave me afterwards. So we don't need these anymore. So I got this load of articles that I stuck in a folder, and that was sort of the first batch of things I collected. And remarkably, I don't know that this would happen nowadays, but the archivist had just been asked to write the Handbook of Texas entry on Bishop John from Texas State Historical Association. They were working on Handbook of Texas articles, and she said, hey, Dawn, how about you write that instead of me? And you know, I had no credentials, I don't think TSHA would let me do that now, but I ended up getting to write the article, which gave me confidence, and I really started to get to know some of the characters in my family story. So with that first file full of newspapers, as many of you may know, keeping family memorabilia it's an absolute privilege, but it also can be a burden. A real responsibility weighs on you. when great-grandfather died in 1961, one of my great aunts inherited a great deal of his personal papers. That's her in the black dress, my Aunt Marie Hernscher. And then when she died, the daughter standing next to her, Mary Jo DiFilippo, she got all of those things. And then in 2014, she brought them all to a family reunion and said, you know, now I want to pass them on to some other caretaker. And some different family members at the reunion took some things, but then I took everything else home, and that was the first really big batch of things that I got. When Alois died, he lived with my grandmother, so she naturally ended up with a lot of his things. She was the baby of the family, and Monsignor and Bishop John were both her older siblings. They, of course, had no children, so when they died, she and her sisters collected papers and belongings that belonged to them, and those things were at my grandmother's house, and even though my grandmother died 12 years ago, we still had the house just until last year, and then last year I took those things too, and that was sort of the second big batch of things. This postcard I have up to just give you a little idea of why I fall in love with this collection every time I look through things. This was a postcard that Marie Hernscher's daughter had brought to the reunion to hand over. It's from Bishop John in Rome. He was visiting in 1974, and he wrote back to Marie and Louis Hernscher, and they saved the postcard for 50 plus years. And it tells a little bit about what he was doing, but then says, and on the way back from Rome to Texas, I'm stopping in New Jersey to baptize the son of Betty and Steve Orsak, so my brother Jason. So on the way back from Rome, Bishop John stops in New Jersey to baptize my brother Jason. And the Hernschers saved a postcard of it. So this is just one of the things that I'm continually amazed by the collection. However, it goes without saying that me donating the papers to the Briscoe was just the very end point of a giant triangle of 100 years of people collecting, making the decision to save things in a closet, translate a letter here or there, label the back of a photograph, and I just ended up being the person who had the privilege to hand it over. And here's an example. Even in 1982, the family was already sort of aware of, their stature as one of the greatest Texas-Czech families, or what. But this was actually from the Sacred Heart Parish Centennial in 1982 in Hallettsville. And it's a bad photo because it was taken from the little Centennial book, but it's Bishop John standing with all this memorabilia that even in 82, the family was carting around. And the County Museum in Hallettsville, too, had a lot of Morkovsky memorabilia in it for a while. So I'm going to tell you about some of the people who were involved in the collection. And I show you these things to say that what's helped me a lot is sort of finding people who had really felt like they had personal connections to different aspects of the materials, and sort of took those things on for themselves. And one of those is Sister Mary Christine Morkovsky. I took this photo 2 weeks ago, I think. And she is a Sister of Divine Providence. She lives at Our Lady of the Lake in San Antonio. And she has translated hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of letters between Morkovsky family members that were in Czech. And her efforts, to me, are the most impressive in this whole endeavor because she spent at least 5 years of her own just, time in the evenings from the age of 84 to 9. So I'm not talking about, when she was spry in her 30s. She did this in her late 80s. And she's very uniquely qualified to do this because she is a nun. She's got a PhD in philosophy, so she's a researcher and a writer. She's a native Texas-Czech speaker, and she's one of the oldest grandchildren. I think she's the second or third oldest grandchild. And so her translations are paired in binders at the Briscoe with the letters. So you can flip through the binder and see the Briscoe may change the housing at some point. But for us, it was in a binder with the letter and then Sister Mary Christine's translation in the back. So she is my hero in this story. Sister Mary Christine's actual sister, Helen, who's here in the front row, and here's a picture of Helen from the collection. She's translating all of Marie Morkovsky's postcards. And Helen's 90, so, go genes in the Morkovsky family. I'm hoping they came to me. She just turned 90 this year, and you can see she has her work cut out for her. There's one of Marie's postcards. So the handwriting, and apparently she rarely used diacritical marks on Czech, and so, it makes it, but Helen's also a native Texas-Czech speaker. And my second cousin, Sandra Morkovsky, who is also here in the front row, has also been translating letters between the Morkovsky brothers. So Alois Morkovsky paid for his one brother to come over. He had a second brother come over. Those two brothers died single here in Texas. And apparently they saved all his letters and then returned them. They got returned to the family. So there's the cross generation, there's the cross correspondence between the brothers, back and forth. And Sandra she scanned all of them. She uses those to practice learning Czech, slowly. But I put this one up because it's just so beautiful. His handwriting and decorated. This letter's from 1890. But I'm going to read you just a couple sentences from a letter from 1889, and I can read this to you because Sandra translated it. November 11th, 1899, dear beloved brother, and this is one from Alois to his brother Joseph that you saw a photo of. I greet you many times, and I am kissing you in spirit. I have received your writing on the 9th of November. I have seen from your writing that it's not very well for those craftsmen in Europe. But if you wanted to just drop it, meaning be done, I'll pay for your trip to Texas. I hope I do not lose you. So I greet you one more time, and I remain yours. I will always love you, brother, Alois. So you can see a little bit of the love between the two brothers. Alois, there are 73 land surveys in the collection. That Alois did by hand of Lavaca and Fayette County. And one of my second cousins, Greg Hauger, is a registered land surveyor. He has his bachelor's degree in land surveying. And he took all of those and scanned them all. And so now the originals are part of the Briscoe. But it's just, if you find somebody who has a special interest in little parts of your collection, you can engage people in helping you with it if you're overwhelmed with materials. And Greg had fascinating information for me that only a land surveyor could say about how Alois could have taught himself to do this work. Greg said, well, anybody who knows trigonometry could teach himself. Okay. And the equipment he might have used and how he might have gone about doing it. So it was fascinating, and I encouraged him to write it all up, and then we can put it in the file folder at the Briscoe with the surveys. So in 2018, my second cousins, the DiFilippo family, scanned all the drawings and the papers done by Alois at Sam Houston State Normal Institute. In the 1990s, a while ago, pre-digital, they transferred all of the reel-to-reel films onto VHS for the family. And seeing those films really cemented my love for the family, because then they become real. If you see somebody in a photograph, but then when you see them on film, it's very different. I could connect with them more, and it just cemented my fascination with the family. And I'm going to give you one example. Here is a group portrait from 1936. They called it a family reunion because it was the month that Bishop John came back from Rome after being ordained. He wasn't a bishop then, but I call him Bishop John. He had just come back and they had a family reunion. So I'm sure you all have group family portraits like this. You know, even the children are sitting so formally. You can't believe that they're children. And you recognize people, but they're a lot younger than when you know them. And so you know it's your family, but they're a little bit removed. But here's a photo, here's a film, 1936 that Monsignor made of the family. It's not great quality, but you know, that's my grandmother. So suddenly they're real people walking towards you, smiling, corralling their children. And it could have been, they're all in the same clothing, in the same place. It could have been just moments before they forced everyone to sit down for that photo. Or after they got up and were glad that they weren't sitting there anymore. But there's all the children. In fact, Helen, I think, is one of these children walking towards the camera, maybe. So they come to life, they're smiling, you can see their unique gestures. There's Helen's mom. And is that you? No? There's her father. But here, I'm gonna scoop my grandmother in the middle. So they did that, and here's Monsignor walking alone because I think he had been behind the camera. And so he probably then turned the camera on somebody, or handed it to somebody. But now look. This really then gives you an idea of what the family was like. They clearly enjoyed being together as Bishop John. Oh, and then she's there left sitting alone. So, you know, that tells you one thing, but the film tells you another. And so the films are now at the Briscoe. Okay, so preservation efforts. So my goal when I started collecting things and knowing that other people had things was always to, one, make them safe, get them into a safe place, and two, make them accessible to family and to researchers, because from the beginning I feel like I thought that there was, you know, historical information here that researchers would want to access at some point. So the first thing was that my brother figured out that we could have all our home movies digitized by Texas Archive of the Moving Image, and so can you. They do it for free as long as you agree to donate a copy to texasarchive.org. And you can actually go now to Tammy's website, Texas Archive of the Moving Image. You can go to their website and search Morkovsky, and you can 27 of the films come up. And they're mostly related to Czech cultural events or Catholic events, because those are the ones that would be of most interest to the general public. But there are a couple of family related, but they did digitize all the family related ones too. So that's definitely something that you can do. In fact, they do it twice a year. It's called the Film Roundup, and they're doing it in October. So if you go to their website and just look up Roundup, there's like a submission form there that you can use, and they did it for free. The second effort was publishing, and when I say publish, I mean self-publish, Alois Morkovsky's autobiography. This is what it looked like after I finished. It's got just black and white photos with his text. But what we started with was, here, I'm going to pass it around. What we started with was his handwritten autobiography in Czech, Bishop John's translation, typed translation in English, and then the family added notes afterwards, because he only wrote up until, I think, he was in his 50s. He wrote about his life up until then, and then after he died, his children added some information. But I had spent so much time looking through files and materials, and having read the autobiography, I started to see all these beautiful documents, letters, photographs that illustrated these things he was talking about. And I thought, how could we not put those things together? And in fact, I think some family members didn't even realize they had read the autobiography before, because what I did ended up looking so different, because it was just a typed manuscript, and people had it over the years. I think it was done in 1980. The family finished notes about him in 81, so it had been floating around, but it's just very different when you have photographs. I used a company called lulu.com. I just searched around for a company that had templates that I liked and seemed affordable. I bought a high-resolution scanner to scan photographs and documents. And I ran his typed autobiography through optical character reading software so I wouldn't have to retype it. And then I just started to put things together and lay it out. I was unemployed that summer, so that helped because it took a long time. But I'm so glad I did it. I donated copies to Texas-Czech organizations, and I took a load to the Morkovsky reunions. But I'm just so glad that I did that. And then that's what the cover looks like. The last effort was donating all of these materials that I collected to an archive for a permanent home so that it would be both safe and accessible. Because a lot of times this is what it looked like in my apartment. And I lived in a 900 square foot apartment. We were about to move to a bigger apartment, but I did not want to move these materials one more time. And, you know, floods, fire, bugs, mold, tornadoes, you know, theft, all of the kinds of things that can affect you if you have your collection in your closet or your basement or your garage. I just didn't feel comfortable anymore keeping them. And for me, it was a before you die project. Like I had to get this done. I was just increasingly concerned that my kids would just throw it in a dumpster if I died, or although they pretty well know me by now, I don't think they would have done that, but I wanted to eliminate the possibility. So I told you I had 21 bankers boxes total that got donated. There's 1,000 photographs total between the whole family. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of newspaper clippings. There's maybe 30 personal notebooks between Bishop John and Grant and Alois Morkovsky. There were 73 Super 8 reels. This is one of the papers in Bishop John's collection. Hundreds of prayer cards between the three men, you know, maybe 150. These are 8 that I think are just so beautiful. But so many of them have these on the back and commemorate, you know, occasions that it's like this mini encyclopedia. Looking through them is like a mini encyclopedia of Texas-Czech and Catholic, you know, events, people's ordinations, people's anniversaries. There's like 125 books from the three men, and you know, the jewel, in my opinion, is that there's over 1,000 letters between, you know, intergenerational, between family members, to and from, but there's also business correspondence in Fayette and Lavaca County, lots of school correspondence that Alois saved from, you know, district people. He also worked for Pan American Insurance briefly and Yoakum National Bank briefly, so there's just so much correspondence. The breadth and the depth of the collection has always been fascinating to me because, you know, taken as a whole, I feel like it's this microcosm of Texas-Czech 20th century Catholic life. And because I didn't want to break up the collection because it's so Czech, so Catholic. I wanted to find an archive that was more about Texas history in general. And actually, I was advised against breaking up the collection by both the Catholic archives in Houston and by the Briscoe. They said it would just had more oomph or something as sort of a family collection together. And these are just images I'm showing you that were pulled, that I scanned. So I met with the Briscoe Center for American History. I met with the Texas Center at Baylor, and I met with the French Simpson Memorial Library in Hallettsville. And when I went, I took a sampling of the materials. And I did consider Texas-Czech libraries and museums. We don't really have an archive, Texas-Czech archive necessarily. Most materials in archives can be, rare or the only thing that exists, and you would never check them out. They can be, not just books. They can be manuscripts and letters and films and diaries, which is really the bulk of the Morkovsky collection. And even though all of those places did express interest in taking the collection, I chose the Briscoe II because of UT's Slavic department. It's the oldest in the state. They've been teaching Czech for 100 years. And there's also a project there run by Dr. Lita Cope called the Texas-Czech Heritage Project, Texas-Czech Cultural Heritage Project. And I just really wanted it to be accessible to Texas-Czech researchers too. So that's how I ended up donating it to the Briscoe. These are some of the materials actually from Bishop John going to Vatican II. And that's his Vatican passport and some of the travel itinerary information. When I met with the institutions, I took the sampling of materials and this is 1 page of 7 of the giant spreadsheet that I'd just been collecting year over year. Every time I had a moment, I would mark in the spreadsheet what was in each box. Because I also knew sort of like the end result. I had looked on the Briscoe's sort of research aid to see what it looks like when someone goes online to see what a collection looks like if somebody wanted to come look inside the boxes. So I knew that at the very least they would post sort of what was in each box. They're not gonna ever scan every piece of paper in the collection and you can just sit in your living room and look at everything. They will hopefully eventually have a description of what's in each box. And so I was trying to get things a little bit ahead by sort of keeping track of what was in each box, hoping that would move the process along, but they've told me that it still could be a year or even 2 years before the collection is processed. So somebody could go online, put in Morkovsky, see what's in each box, and then fill out a form that says, I want to come look in box 10. And then you would go to the reading room at the Briscoe, they bring the box out to you, you put the gloves on, and you can look through all the materials. Here are just a few books that have helped me along the way. I don't know if you're family historians and that's why you're here, but definitely the one on the left, How to Archive Family Keepsakes, was helpful. I'm also a food person, so the one in the center is helping me with some other projects. As foolproof as I think my memory is, 6 months after somebody gives me something, I don't remember who that person was in the unlabeled photograph, and I don't remember about that story they told me. So, if there's anything I would recommend, it's labeling photographs on pencil, with a pencil on back, or doing something like this, where you can tell who somebody is. I made shorthand for myself of every photo I had already scanned. If you end up with multiple copies of photos, it can get really complicated, and you don't want to do the work twice. Helen, which one, are you in here, Helen? Oh, yes, up on the top right. I would. She was. I also no longer trust necessarily the notes that I make when I talk to people. So I've started when I talk to somebody about their memories or something they give me, I'm using an app called otter.ai, and it transcribes as you talk. So I can turn it on. It's not super cheap, but I can turn it on and it will type as the person talks, so I don't have to focus on that. And then later I can go through and extract the information that I want.
Is it accurate?
Mostly. I mean, lots of times when I'm talking to people, they might use a check word here and there, and of course it doesn't get that. So you absolutely have to go back through. Just like when you scan these materials with optical character reading software, oh my gosh. I sometimes wonder if it wasn't going to be shorter to just type it in. But especially with old materials on typewriters where they would use liquid paper or they'd use XXX, remember that? To get rid of something. But it is mostly, it's worth it. I think it gets you far ahead. It's otter like the animal.ai. Yeah. And you can use it on your phone or you can use it on your desktop too. The one thing that I did, obviously I didn't write Alois Morkovsky's autobiography, but the one thing I did do was the timeline in the back. I thought that would be useful because I was always saying, well, where was he in 1924? Or how many years did he teach there? So that's been hugely helpful. And now I've been just adding to it with other family members' events and occasions and work life and things to help me. It really helped me sort of put people's events and lives into something that I can understand, and sort of how things overlap in people's lives, and to get a better sense of who they were. And my one example of that is, this is my grandparents. They got married in June 6, 1937. 4 months later, Bishop John was driving a car with his mother and his brother, and they were hit by an army truck, and the mother and son were killed. So just 4 months later, and then Alois moved in with these newlyweds. So, it's one thing to see married, June 6, 1937. It's one thing to see that on a piece of paper, but when it was, how their lives were around that time, it just gives you a totally different, perspective on them. Imagine adjusting to newlywed life while you're mourning your mother and brother, while your father moves in with you and is mourning his wife and son. So I can't imagine what 1937, was like for them. There's actually some web software that I found while I was thinking about this talk that looks really cool. It's called treelines.com. And it allows you to make collaborative timelines with family members. And you can put in photographs and text and basically create a timeline for your family or particular stories. And it looked really cool. So one regret I have is that I didn't document from whom I got every single piece of paper. Because I would like to credit them more. I want to go back and ask them, how did you get this thing? What was your relationship with Alois like, and then how does it feel to hand it over to an archive, or that I handed it over to an archive? So I wish that I was better documenting that, but I didn't really sort of see where things were going over the last 25 years. I just knew it was going to happen someday, and I wish now that I had done a better job of that. There was 101 of us at this reunion. I counted them a couple days ago. And actually last year's reunion was bigger, I think. Or was it about the same? It's always in Hallettsville at the KC Hall, or has always been for a long time. Then I wanted to read you some language from the deed of gift, in case any of you are thinking about donating your family's papers to an archive. The deed of gift that I signed with the Briscoe upon donating the collection has this language in the first paragraph. I, Dawn Orsak, hereby irrevocably donate and convey to the University of Texas at Austin for the benefit of the Briscoe Center all title and interest that I possess in the materials as described below. I understand that the gift I am making is a permanent donation. So that gave me pause for sure, and it gave me some anxiety. But I mean, really, it was for selfish reasons. Like, I can never go look through the boxes whenever I want to for inspiration or comfort or just on a whim. Family research now is going to be serious. I got to make an appointment with the Briscoe like everybody else. Go sit in the reading room and look at the materials. But the regrets I feel are far outweighed by the positives, which is all those things that I mentioned: bugs, rats, flood, fire, theft are never going to happen to the collection. They're always going to be safe. And frankly, the Morkovsky family was seeing the materials when we would do our traveling show at the reunion once a year. Once a year, they can now go to the Briscoe and sit in the reading room and look at the materials. And there's, quadruple, 10 times the amount of cool stuff at the Briscoe than we ever would have brought at the reunion. So it's actually, I feel like, of more benefit. Okay, I'm going to end with a little song sung by Alois Morkovsky. I found a reel at my grandparents' house that was just audio, and it said Collis family, which is one of his son-in-laws. My grandmother married a Collis. But he must have gone over there to the Collis family's house for like what seems like a family talent show. So there's like children singing and people playing instruments. And then I was just listening to it because I had it digitized and I was like, wonder what this is. So it's very cool, but then I heard this.
Now we are going to have a song, I'm a Texan, sung by Mr. Alois Morkovsky, over 80 years young.
So 1950. Isn't that sweet? So I asked a friend who's an expert in Texas-Czech folk songs if she had the lyrics to that, because I couldn't understand it, and I wanted to follow along. And she sent back to me a book I had sent to her from the Morkovsky collection with the lyrics, and remarkably, they had been translated by Monsignor in a KJZT book. And to me, that, him singing I am a Texan in Czech in a Catholic book sort of really summarizes the family to me. So.
Okay, so I know we've got some questions from the audience, both online and in person here. So so I'm going to just quickly glance through the ones because I know there have been several comments in the chat online that came in right when we first started. Thank you for having this program. I'm looking forward to it. Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be able to listen today digitally from Sweden. All right.
One of my best friends.
I love that. And apparently,
Oh,
it's
yes.
about Alois, he loves Scrabble too.
Bishop John, too, is a huge Scrabble player.
And somebody else says, yeah, big brother.
Oh.
And I just love the presentation. Thank you so much for sharing. Okay, I think that we've gotten through all of those. All right, so questions in the room?
I have heard, I don't know how true it is, but that a lot of the younger generations aren't that much into collecting papers and stuff, but you think what your approach is the way around that, digitizing it, putting it into an online system so you can get right to it? Is that the...
Okay, so that the people on Zoom can hear as well, we had a question about the younger generation and their approach and whether digitizing it and getting it, available online is the way to go. So I'm going to turn it over to you now, Dawn.
Am I still on this mic?
You are.
Okay, that's why I did the autobiography that way, because I was really hoping that visuals would interest some younger people in looking at it rather than just the text. Hello. I don't know. My children are sitting in front of me. One is 24 and one is 14. And we were actually talking about it in the car on the way over here. My older son was like, Mom, no, I'm not that interested. But, I wasn't that interested until I was older than him. And frankly, I'm not interested in any family members who lived like before the invention of photography. Like that, to me, that really cements it. But if then I have to go back farther, just looking for a name on paper, I lose interest. So maybe, and certainly engaging them in digital projects that involve both those skills plus their family members might be a way to do it. My younger son, if I asked him to start something on tree lines, for example, let's do a thing together, he might be a little bit interested in the web part, but I guarantee he'll never look at it again until he has his own children. So maybe, but I'm not sure. It just seems to be one of those things that, not until you have your own kids or you get a little bit older and you're watching your parents age or something that you start to realize the benefit. Yeah.
So you talked about how much you gave to Briscoe. What happens to the rest of it?
So what is the rest of it?
Just so that the Zoomers can hear, she gave a lot of this collection to the Briscoe, and now the person in the audience is asking what happens to the rest of it.
Right. There are probably another hundreds and hundreds of pieces of paper out there with people that I don't know about because they don't want to donate it. They want to keep it, which is totally fine. We have a box that's now going to go to the reunion. It's mostly clothing. It's clothing worn by Marie Morkovsky and the christening gown and a quilt that Marie Morkovsky made in the 30s and wedding gifts of Alois and Marie Morkovsky from 1898. I don't know that the Briscoe is going to want those kinds of things. It may end up that they just eventually get dispersed, one thing to, different people. Do you still have? Oh, Helen's got all the postcards from Marie Morkovsky. I have some photos that I'm still I want to scan them now before I hand them over. So I'm not sure. I'm now on a mission, a crusade, to encourage people to donate anything they have and to expand on the collection because it's the Morkovsky family papers, not just those three men at all. So anyone who is a Morkovsky or a descendant and there's some cross, communication or reference in the materials, I think it's worthy of being there. So. And there are certainly many things of Bishop John's and Monsignors that are also at other places. So I'm sort of on a mission too to collect where those things, like the Catholic Archives in Houston Galveston Diocese, obviously when Bishop John died. The Texas-Czech Heritage and Cultural Center in LaGrange has some things of Bishop John's. I don't know who donated them, but they've got a pair of shoes and that he wore and things like that. So I'm trying to just keep track. Oh my gosh. Actually, that is a very interesting, I wonder what happens to, somebody mentioned Bishop John's ring. I don't know, I'm sure there's an official name for it that a bishop wears. I have no idea, maybe he was buried in it. Yeah, probably buried in it, yeah, in Houston, yeah.
How close is the town that you came from in Monrovia to Poland?
How close is the town they came? How close is the town that they came from in Czech Republic to Poland? It's very close. It's close. Can I speak in here?
No, now try.
Now try it. Okay. So Frenstadt is the northeast of Moravia, and it's pretty close to the Polish border. Also, it's pretty close to the Slovakian border. I think that between that and the Polish border is Ostrava, another big city, Ostrava. So close, but not on the border. Yeah. Is it what you would call Silesia? Or Silesia a little farther north? A little farther north. Yeah.
How do you, my family came from the Betchva area near Rosenau.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a lot of things that my grandmother brought over.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you think about, I was going to donate a crucifix that our grandfather carved to the Czech Museum in Temple.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know how well they preserve things.
Somebody's asking about the Czech museum in Temple that I think is owned by SPJST now.
Yes.
Yeah. I have not, it's been so long, I haven't been there in years and years and years, but they're very committed to historical preservation, so I would think that an object especially would be great there. Go check it out for yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, that's for me too, especially even with the French Simpson Library in Hallettsville, you know, go take a look around and see what if you left it there and walked away, how would you feel? Yeah.
Did you say that Briscoe was going to be digitizing a lot of this?
That's completely up to somebody asked about whether the Briscoe was going to digitize the collection. I doubt that they're going to do that, because their priorities, you know, they have Ann Richards' papers, they have Willie Nelson's papers, they have Dolph Briscoe's papers. So I think that it's not going to be a high priority for them. Now, I don't know whether we could nudge that with a large donation or something. I have no idea. But I think, you know, at the very least, the box descriptions will eventually be online, so somebody can at least read a description of what the files are in a box and then go look at them themselves.
And one other thing about the deed of gift, was there any language about, I mean, because I know a lot of museums and libraries can sell things if they choose.
That's one of the sides. I mean, that's one of the downsides, is that once you donate it, it is theirs. Now, they also looked through everything and you know, they chose not to take some things. So they do have the opportunity to not take things that they know they're not going to use. Honestly, I think the only things they might eventually dispose of or disperse are some of the books. There was like 125 books, and they took them all, and you know, they were owned by family, but aren't it's a book. Yeah, so, but that's something you have to be aware of.
And let me follow.
Oh, yes, you can speak directly to that.
I think I'm on now. Let me just speak a little more to that, but because I was.
Step in a little bit.
Okay. Better. So before I was executive director for the Center for Texas Studies, I was a longtime museum curator and visited with donors all the time who had those same concerns. And I can say that what you will want to do is look at that facility's gift agreement and ask them about their de-accession policies, about what they do with things when they determine they're no longer appropriate, or if they determine they're not appropriate for their collection. And they should have, and if they don't, you don't want to donate it to this facility, but they will have a list of, this is how we handle those objects. And so that way you will know what they may do if they want to get rid of something that you donated. Another ethical thing I'll mention about that is that normally if an institution is going to sell something, they can only sell something and then use that money to go back into care of their collections. It can't go to keep the lights on. That's not an ethical move. So there's some considerations there to be made. But by asking a lot of questions, you can get the answers that you need.
Go ahead.
Okay, an adjunct question to her first question was the letters and postcards that are handwritten. Is there any effort to transcribe it so that those things are searchable online?
No. I also doubt that they're ever going to do that. It doesn't mean that we can't have a personal family website that has things posted to it, which I've thought about doing as sort of the next preservation effort, because I know the Briscoe isn't going to digitize everything. They also have equipment and things there that you can use to scan things. They have a light box to take photographs of objects and things like that. But I don't think the Morkovsky collection's ever going to be that way. Yeah.
Unless one of those two guys over there becomes the president.
President of UT and decides maybe makes it a personal priority. Yeah. Now there could be some synergy between the collection, which is part of the reason why it's at the Briscoe, between it and Lita Cope's Texas-Czech Heritage Project, which has been transcribing oral history interviews with Czechs. And so you can see those online. So there may be that we could create some synergy between those two projects. Yeah.
Well, squeaky wheels tend to get oil, so.
Right,
you know,
right.
Like, the more people that request to see a certain box or to see something, then it behooves the institution to say, let's digitize this so we're not
Right.
rifling these papers all the time.
Right. So that means I need to get the word out about the collection being there.
And if, like, the Catholic or
Mhm.
Czech end of it is needing it all the time, then they might just like to chip in.
Right. Right.
All right, any other questions? And I think we've gotten through everything on, so there are some Morkovskys watching from Red Rock, Texas.
Yay.
And so I've answered the question about will the reporting be available already. Somebody on Zoom asks, what was the name of the website you said we can build on our family tree? My mother's side is Czech, but records were not kept, unfortunately.
It's called treelines.com, like all one word, treelines, TREELINES.com.
What does it do?
You load in photos and text and dates, and it will show you like a timeline at the bottom with dates highlighted, and at the top it's like scrolling through a story. It matches the text you put in with the photograph. So, you know, my grandfather came in 1888, and it'll show up on the timeline with the photo and your words, and then you scroll to the next page and it will move the timeline along and show you the next piece of the story. So it's great for building and then I guess, you know, sharing with family so that they can see it.
And also Dottie Davis, president of TWCCHS Czech chapter, says thank you for the beautiful presentation. And somebody asks, do you have a copy of the photo of Bishop John with Mother Teresa that you can share with the family?
Totally.
So, yeah.
That's pretty cool.
And then Doug Kubicek says, thank you for helping take care of Lavaca County history. All for Texas, Doug Kubicek.
Doug's on the Texas Historical Commission in Lavaca County and is a local historian.
And then also somebody else says, an outstanding example of preservation and love for historical storytelling for the next generation. Congratulations, Dawn. Job well done. And then Rose says, please post info about seeing the recording. Would like for the rest of my family who are related to be able to view. That is a few comments above this in the chat. It's going to be on the Fort Worth Public Library's YouTube channel. And I think if you just, it'll take about 10 to 14 days for the video to be edited and uploaded. So after that time, if you search for Dawn's name on the Fort Worth Public Library's YouTube channel, you should find it. And great presentation. Thank you for having this program. Oh, and we've circled back through now. So. All right. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for listening.